Hello everyone, my name is Tim Tang with Hughes and we're coming to you from the 2024 Connexus Annual Conference. I'm here with Allie Russell of Conley Rose. Allie, can you first maybe just tell us a little bit about what is it that you do and what are you focused on?
Sure, so I'm a data privacy and intellectual property attorney, so I focus mostly on the data privacy side with a little bit of the IP that comes into play when you're talking about law and technology. You can't really do that without talking about IP. So that's a big role, but I really focus on data privacy.
Can you maybe help us understand some of the fundamentals of data privacy for the convenience store industry?
Sure, so the first thing that you have to be aware of is personally identifiable information can be very broad. It's generally considered to be anything that can link reasonably to an identifiable individual. So there's a lot of PII in the convenience industry, especially as we're starting to see more and more technology be used and ways that you can identify people to give them more personalized experiences and targeted advertising. You're having this PII come into play, and sometimes maybe even sensitive personal information. So that's just kind of the ground level understanding of I have this PII, okay, I might need to start thinking about what I'm going to do about it and what I'm allowed to do with it.
When it comes to PII, are we just talking like email addresses or mobile phone numbers?
No, it can be almost anything that could identify an individual. We're starting to see privacy laws that aren't even giving you just like this list of identifiers anymore because there's so many ways that an individual can be identified. And one of the biggest ones that we see that kind of gets overlooked is IP address. So that brings cookies and tracking, especially with the mobile apps, into scope. And you have to be really careful that you're getting proper notice and consent when it comes to these new technologies.
Can you tell us a little bit about the state of the union as it relates to regulations? What's happening there?
Sure, so right now there are currently technically 16 state privacy laws, but I include Florida and Nevada, which brings our count to 18 because they do have requirements that do include privacy policies and or the consumer data rights. So I do like to include those just to be complete. So we are at 18 states that all have something different. And at first we were seeing kind of similar laws come out, and now we're starting to see laws that have really unique provisions in them. Texas and now Nebraska have this concept of a small business that you have to figure out, okay, am I a small business? Then I'm going to get swept into scope rather than it just being this monetary value or number of consumer threshold. So we're really starting to see some unique provisions in this, and it's going to be difficult to comply when all these laws have little nuances that you have to be aware of.
Can you maybe give us just a kind of an overview of kind of how are these things structured? What is it that they're trying to do?
Sure, so the end goal is notice and consent when it comes to the consumers. They really, really want those two things to be the centerpiece. And the structure that is very common is that we have a list of consumer rights, right to know, access, deletion, stuff like that. And then a requirement to have a privacy policy. Usually it goes into explain how to get consent, what type of consent is needed, kind of like the GDPR with the legal basis. And then we see these DPAs, which are data protection assessments that you have to do if you're doing certain things with data. This could be profiling, targeted advertising, anything that's considered high risk, which some laws don't define very clearly, which kind of leaves you in a guessing game sometimes. So those are the pretty basic tenets that we see a lot in these laws.
How do I understand whether or not these laws apply to me or not?
So these laws have applicability thresholds, and some are monetary, some are the number of consumers from the residents of that state that you have, some are if you derive a certain percentage of your revenue from the sale of personal information. One of the more difficult things though is, especially in this industry where one, it's interstate, so gas stations, you're getting people who are traveling. And so you might be in one state and you're getting consumer data from a lot of individuals in another state, and then there's websites and apps where, you could be getting consumers from any state. So there's a lot of touch points where you might see yourself hitting that threshold even though you don't necessarily expect it because you don't operate in a state with a data privacy law.
As a small business or even as a large business, I'm working with other third-party providers. How do I understand my responsibility versus their responsibility?
So these data privacy laws have this concept of a controller and a processor. A controller is the one who actually says what data is being collected, how it's going to be used, and they really set the stage for all the roles that are going to happen. And the processor just, they help the controller achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. So you have to look through the law and try to get a grasp of, okay, I'm the controller or I'm the processor, and then you can start to put in place the pieces of what your obligations are going to be. And sometimes that can get complicated. In the GDPR, we have this concept of the joint controller. In the US, we don't really see that, so it can start to get sticky where you have two organizations that maybe both are controllers in some situations, but we just don't have that concept of joint controller, so you have to be very particular. What data collection, what role am I the controller, where am I the processor?
If I'm a business looking to engage with a loyalty, are there specific kinds of questions I should be asking them?
A loyalty?
Like a loyalty provider. So if I'm a business trying to engage with a potential third party, what kinds of things should I be asking them in terms of their current data practices and those kind of things, so that I'm at least somewhat assured that I'm working with a reasonable entity?
Sure. So the first thing you should want to do is, are they aware of these laws? A lot of times with all of these new laws, they can be hard to keep track of, and just knowing whether or not they even take those into consideration is very important, but then also understanding what their role is and what they're doing. So do they try to offer personalized ads, things that could be considered profiling, things that could be targeted advertising? Do they use AI? That way you can really get a good understanding of what they're doing, so that you know how to assess what kind of data protection you need to really be thinking about.
AI is getting a lot of attention. How do you think about AI from a data privacy perspective?
I think AI can be an absolutely incredible tool, and I don't think it should be discounted at all, but there are definitely data privacy concerns. Hallucinations are a big problem that you hear come up a lot, and just really making sure that we have a strong grasp on data privacy and how it's going to interact with AI. That way you can increase and have the maximum benefit of that AI, but you're really trying to mitigate that risk and also keep consumers from having their data exposed in ways that they would not want.
If I were a retailer trying to get into this space for the first time, any guidance in terms of first steps I should be thinking? Where should I prioritize my activities as it relates to data privacy?
Yeah, so I think the first place that I would start is just going through and trying to find the laws a little bit yourself. They're difficult to understand. Reading it can be tough, but there's a lot of really great resources out there. The IAPP has some great resources, Data Guidance has some great resources, and just familiarize yourself with, okay, what is this talking about? That way you can try to have some educated questions and really start to understand where you need to go next, because if you don't know where you're starting, you don't know where you're going to go. So I think it's really important to get that good first step of what's out there. I need to get a basic understanding so that I can ask some educated questions, and then find a data privacy expert, somebody to really help you.
Can you talk a little bit about what's at risk here? What if I don't do these things? What am I risking?
Sure. So the two big things that I see is financial risk and then reputational risk. So financial risk, a lot of these data privacy laws do not have a private right of action. They're left to the AG or sometimes another enforcement arm in order to bring actions if there is a violation of these laws. But some are having $7,500 fines per violation. Under the GDPR, massive fines could be up to 4% of your global GDP, or it could be 20 million euro, whichever is higher. So we're seeing pretty massive fines that can come into play here. And then of course there's the reputational risk. If you aren't protecting people's data and then they find out, they're not going to trust you as much anymore. And that brings its own kind of set of concerns, especially in an industry like this where there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of technology out there, and everybody's trying to get ahead and put their stake in the ground. And if you have a reputational hit like that, it could hurt.
Maybe one last question, just kind of looking forward, how do you see data privacy evolving? What's going to happen next?
So I think the states are going to continue to pass more and more laws. I think we're going to start to see a lot more interesting provisions come out of this. I mean, it's just going to get even more of a patchwork of systems until there's a federal privacy law, and even then, if it's not drafted properly, you could have all the states plus federal. So I see this as a continuing issue until we can maybe get something at the federal level through that's going to help kind of put everything in check, to help businesses actually be able to have an attainable data protection standard. And that would be the best for the consumer too. If a business can't understand what they need to do and can't comply, the consumer's also at a loss.
Allie, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, it was great, thank you.
Everyone, I've been speaking with Allie Russell of Conley Rose. We're coming to you from the 2024 Connexus Annual Conference.